They will be joined by opening opposition TCD Phil A, Dylan and Jack. In closing government, we have Sofia A, Nikki and Rumen. And in closing opposition, LSEA, Ahmed and Matt. I will now hand over to Milos. Just when you're doing Q&As, use the mic, pass it over, try and make sure that's close to your face. Good luck, have fun.
All right, everybody settled. Welcome to the grand final of Zagreb EUDC 2022! We have four wonderful teams gunning for the crown, and to kick us off, I'd like to introduce the Prime Minister. Here, here.
Can I be heard? Okay, good to go. Okay, a few points of framing to start. First, I think it's probable that if intelligent life does exist, it's very, very far away from us. The reason for this is twofold. One, we've looked at a lot of nearby planets already and just kind of found nothing. So we have things like the James Webb Space Telescope, which produces some pretty nice images of space that we can look at. And we found from looking at pretty much all of the nearby galaxies and star systems that most of the planets that could potentially host life just don't really exist around us. And so I think it's very unlikely they're going to be anywhere near us. But it's also because there are very, very specific conditions that need to be met for life to exist. Things like existing in a certain radius of a solar system close to a star, so it's not too hot or not too cold. And that just means that, again, a lot of candidate planets just aren't very close by to us and tend to be very far away. So it's probably going to be far away. Importantly, this means we're not going to be able to ever really reach them, or if we do, it's probably not for like a really, really, really long time. Usually because it requires us to be able to do things like traveling faster than the speed of light. We're nowhere near achieving this at the moment, given that we don't know how to go faster, like anywhere near, like even 10% of the speed of light currently. We're probably not going to figure that out for quite a lot of years. I think chances are our planet is going to implode entirely before we actually get to that point, because it probably requires us to like build some reactor that means that we blow everything up or something, or just like climate change happens and then things are going to go badly. But secondly, I think it's very probable that this life isn't that intelligent in the first place. So intelligent life doesn't mean like they're like brainiacs who know everything. Intelligent life means that they're just capable of possessing like consciousness, and they aren't like bacteria that are living on these planets. You know, elephants are pretty intelligent, but they're also not capable of like, you know, having language. Therefore, I think it can just be a load of like deer existing on some planet that's very far away from us. I think importantly, and this is very likely, right? Because presumably, if there was super intelligent life that existed elsewhere in the universe, they probably have already figured out how to do things like space travel. They'd have already figured out how to like come and obliterate our civilization already if that was something that they really wanted to do. I think the important implication of this is that if Op want to run something about why this like means that aliens are going to come and obliterate the planet, it's probably not true. They probably would have done it already if this was the case, or we'd probably already be able to see them in our telescopes, like invading other parts of the universe or being present elsewhere in the universe. Therefore, I don't think this is very likely to happen. So the case we're going to bring you from opening government is very simple in terms of why this humbles humanity and why it allows us to enter an age of enlightenment that is better for everyone. Because it's important to note that humans are often very self-absorbed, and we see ourselves and our problems as being the center of the universe. We have a very self-privileged view of ourselves, where we are the most intelligent life that exists on our planet, and we're unaware of any other life that exists in the universe. Therefore, we think that we are the most intelligent life that exists exist in the universe. This very much feeds into a sense of self-exceptionalism for humanity, where we think that we're the most intelligent beings, and thus we have a right over everything that is around us. Consider how this makes humans behave. Things like A, meaning that we treat other species around us with disregard, because we think of ourselves as being more intelligent than them, and therefore having a claim to their habitats, meaning we do things like abusing our environment, or feeling like we have an inherent right to nature, but also it drives harmful narratives of self-exceptionalism again. Things like, for example, religion, which I think probably doesn't exist in a world where we know that there's intelligent life on other planets, given that most religious, well, with the exception of maybe like Buddhism, most religious narratives often say that God created humanity in their own image, that God only really created the Earth as a planet where like life exists. Therefore, I think this fundamentally challenges a lot of those narratives, and people probably aren't so willing to buy into religion anymore, or they buy more into other religions which aren't so like, anthropocentric, and are instead like believing in things like Buddhism instead, which is maybe something that is good. What happens on our side then when you suddenly understand that there are others out there? I think firstly to note, most people just don't really know what the degree of intelligence of these life are, even if they're unlikely to be intelligent for the reasons that we've told you already in terms of like, there aren't spaceships flying around all the time, so they're probably not that intelligent. People don't know this, and so there's often going to be a lot of speculation as to whether or not these other life forms are as intelligent as us or are potentially more intelligent than us. I think the important thing is this shatters our sense of self-exceptionalism, and it shatters our sense of feeling like we're the center of the universe and we're the center of everything that is important. It shows us that there is more than just Earth out there, and I think that's important because it very much changes how humans value themselves in very positive ways. Think about the moral and philosophical discourse that would exist in the world when we understand this information, when we're having discussions about what the nature of life is and what the nature of life in the universe is in a public forum, insofar as this is something that enters the public consciousness when this information is revealed. I think that means more people are forced to consider the inherent value of all life around them, because when we discuss whether other life might be more intelligent than us, and we challenge the conception that life is only valuable because we are the most intelligent people, then it means that people are forced to consider other things around them as having more inherent value. I think the important thing is that A, if that means that people are just nicer to our own environment, then that's something that's very positive, because it means that like lots of animals stop being slaughtered by humans, or it means that we're more likely to do things like fighting climate change. Yeah, sure.
Aren't you quite likely far more intuitively to value intelligent life if you believe it only exists on Earth? And if it's somehow space deer, why on Earth would you consider them to have the equal moral value as a human to get your impacts, even if your premise is true?
No, but like, again, A, people don't know that it's just space deer. It could be like really smart space deer. So I think realistically that people just don't know, like there's nothing in this machine that tells you what the life is. It just tells you that the life exists in the first place. So people can still value that. But also like, I don't get why you're not going to value intelligent life, given that humans are like, as a whole, apparently quite intelligent. So you probably still value your own life, and you probably are still going to value intelligent life, even if you know that it exists somewhere else in the universe. Like, no one's going to be like, humans are not important anymore because there is life elsewhere. I just think people are going to be like, humans aren't the smartest people ever anymore, and the difference then is that they treat other things with more respect because of it. I think also we have to consider things like the wave of inspiration that could arise because of this, because now you have people speculating as to what intelligent life might look like, and that means that you get a drive of things like media being produced that speculates as to this. Think about films like Star Wars that millions and millions of people around the world enjoy, that were sparked by things like the space race happening in the 60s. I think in the very same way, we're likely to have people fantasizing about what this intelligent life might look like, and if that means that we get a lot of media produced that people really enjoy, then people are probably going to be a lot happier in this world because of that. I think also, like, we really like Croatia, and maybe it's great that Croatia gets to announce this information because they have a cool thing credited towards them, and that's another reason why we should probably like this quite a lot. But realistically, again, I think if this means that people reconsider harmful value systems that often lead to people killing each other, things like religion, where wars often start because people believe that, they are the people who were created by God and are the most important people, and we're able to challenge those value systems on a very fundamental level, then if we get rid of harmful systems of belief, then I think we're much more likely to live in a peaceful world, and a world where people treat each other with respect. I think it's an honor and a dream to be speaking in this final for you all. Karis, it's been a wild ride, and I've loved every minute of having you by my side. We're Europe's best and only all-ginger team. For the last time, representing the best institution in the world, OG.
Thank you very much for that nice speech. And now to start off the opposition case, I'd like to invite the leader of the opposition.
Good. Panel, Hobbes was wrong to differentiate from the state of nature. It is life which is nasty, brutish, and short. 2 points of framing at the top, collectivization, and then talking about the curse that is existence. Let's be clear here. This house here is being asked a moral question, that which we hope for all moral actors within the debate, what is good for them. The second clarification to is, who should we consider moral actors? We've already heard it's the idea of anyone who has choice, consciousness, rationality, and so on, but we say we should expand this. It's animals too. The idea that we cannot know that which is pertaining within the mental processes of other beings, epistemic access, drink. But crucially then, the idea that past that, you don't be certain. Therefore, we have to defer to outside things. Ideas of, do they exhibit choice or not, which we see animals doing each and every day? Can they experience pain, which we know to be certain for all animals? These are the things which are certain. These are the things which we should base moral prescriptions on, not of uncertain things which we cannot know inside of other beings' heads. Crucially then, the recharacterization. We say, due to the nature of the universe, if there is other life forms, there has to be a multitude, a huge, huge scale of other life forms. The reason for this is this thing called the Fermi paradox. Either it is the case that we have passed a point of destruction in the universe. We were the sole unique condition that exists even in an infinite area that was able to get past this point of destruction for all life forms. We've already passed that point. Or it's not. If we know there's other life forms, we know it's not. We know that that is not a unique thing in and of itself, and therefore the odds of other life forms having it too expands exponentially more and more and more. What does this mean? It means, first of all, we are now non-unique. This is also crucial because it means it's probably very similar conditions. This isn't going to be like space steer or Boltzmann brains. It's probably because of if we pass this threshold, we probably did it in a way that's necessary to do so. Therefore, the other existence in the universe is probably very similar to us, and therefore we can weigh a lot of things. There's probably a pack jammer with no mustache doing this debate light years away. But crucially then, past this, it means there's an insane scale here, because there has to be so many different intelligent life forms, meaning it outweighs humanity in and of itself if it was more important for them, any of them, sorry Edinburgh. What does this mean then? Because yes, while this means humanity kind of hope that like our world isn't going to die, I do not care, because this is not something you're confronted with every day. Have we passed the Fermi paradox point? Who the fuck says that any normal day? Not me, and I'm a debater. Crucially then, when you say what is crucial is the idea that life is unavoidable. Life confronts you each and every day, the structure of it, the way it interacts with your brain, the way the pain that hits you all the time when you are beaten. This is something which is unavoidable. This is what this debate is about. What does that life look like then? We say it's a curse of existence. In fact, curses, because it's bound up with three of them. The first is the curse that comes with energy and the nature of energy within the universe. Because it's obvious that life requires energy inherently, or else it could not do things. But secondly, larger beings, for the easiest way, especially if they're quite intelligent and therefore figure out this is an easier way, is to get energy from other beings. Crucially, for example, say plants get photosynthesis to bound up energy. But then smart animals go, hey, we can eat you, thanks for doing all the work, thank you. Then moreover, it scales up and up and up, and you get more and more intelligent life. But moreover, this means food chains and evolution, the necessity of it, and given that these are very similar beings to us, means that there's a constant structure of oppression of animals across any of the, whether they be terrestrial or extraterrestrial. But moreover, we say this expands to all resources, because it's what starts to what structures humans' brains via evolution, which I'll touch on in a second. But we say the very nature that this is the way we should pursue things, this is the way we should do things. If it's easiest if we take energy and resources from other people and give it to ourselves, means you get things like conflict within the real world, especially because energy is not necessarily limitless, and given that they're probably quite similar to us, and we haven't invented infinite energy yet, I'm not sure they can either. But crucially then, it expands to other resources, because it's a mental process. It looks like things in the current system of capital, where people who work a bunch, other people then just get the rent from their work and don't have to do anything in it themselves. We say this is a mental process which is likely to expand outwards. But B, we say evolution has a curse in and of itself, because that which has made to the top of the food chain, if intelligent life exists in and of itself, we say there's certain conditions which means it's likely to do so. It's the fact that it never settles. It constantly needs to push more and more and more, and therefore is not outcompeted by another organism. It's the fact that it deeply fears pain and therefore constantly insulates itself from making sure it does not die, or else it wouldn't have made it past that point of destruction I mentioned earlier. It is in these instances then that life is likely to exist. What does this mean? It means they constantly do not acclimatize. If you are happy in life, it's not enough, because you need to get more and more and more. You acclimatize constantly to what that which was good is now the norm, and you need to push further and further. It also means pain is very proximate. It's probably the most proximate emotion for these people. Sadness, depression, and all these things are things which are unavoidable because evolution forced us to have them so we could be alive. This is something which is necessary for all these intelligent beings, at least the ones which likely rise to the top. Crucially then, so far we've shown that there's likely conflict, and which brings about pain, but also pain weighs very highly. Sure.
I'm
I'm sorry, but animals do not have sentience. They cannot reflect on pain. They're not the metric in this debate. Please debate something that is realistic, quantifiable.
They can feel pain. You do not know that they don't have sentience because, drink again, epistemic access. I've already explained all these things. You are being speculative and weighing up moral virtues based on that. I do not know you, so you deserve no moral value is a disgusting sentiment in and of itself, and it's one we need to start applying to animals and realize that we should not do so. Moreover, we say there is a curse that is bound up with consciousness too. The idea that, bendy paper, crucially, intelligence means at least rationality, as per Jamie. What does this mean? It means you constantly have to ask yourself questions and you're constantly bound with trying to figure out that which is in front of you. Now, when we're at the bottom of the food chain with these kinds of things, it's quite straightforward. I need food, I go get food. We say that still, though, has other things bound up with it. The idea that even at those instances, when you are pain, you're saying, why is there pain? Why do these things exist? There's inherent nihilism and constant skepticism that exists because of intelligence. Intelligence is bound up with skepticism in and of itself. Crucially, then, we say that skepticism is likely to default in nihilism in all instances. So even if you want to try overcome all these previous impacts through meaning, you're not able to do so. Things like religion is immaterial, and it's hard to then conceptualize that to the material. Everything in front of you is material, so if you go, oh, there's meaning in life because of religion, how does that work if it's not connected to everything in front of me? If I'm told it's immaterial, if I'm sure God may control it, but that doesn't seem to make sense. That doubt, that skepticism is something which will always make you doubt the meaning. And unless the meaning is concrete, there's no way it can overcome all the previous curses. But crucially then, because you constantly doubt it, you begin to have no belief in it. You believe that it causes you further depression, further nihilism expounds. The material meanings too are fragile because you know meaning must be certain, but my loved one could die, my job could go. These are things which then seem to not rationally connect. And even if you could figure out a way to do it, you will constantly doubt your own rationalization. The doubt that is bound up within rationality, because that which it allows it to make choices, is something which is inescapable. Panel. I know it's grim, but existence is quite inescapable. We must weigh all actors in this debate. We must not presume things. We must not weigh ourselves as necessarily better than anyone else, especially because that's what the Prime Minister says is likely to happen. Crucially then, we say you should propose. Thank you. Oppose.
Thank you very much for that nice speech. And now to continue the government case, I'm happy to introduce Deputy Prime Minister.
Am I audible? Haha, please laugh. Okay, starting speech in 3, 2, 1. The universe right now is a black forest of uncertainty, a factor that fundamentally limits our ability to dream and hinders our imagination and creativity in ways that darkens our perspectives and clouds our ability to access not just inspiration in our lives, but access now new perspectives about our place and the information about why we exist and why we are here. I'd like to just quickly tackle what we got out of opening opposition, i.e., like, if the answer is no, it's like terrible for us. I think this suggests there is a very low probability life can exist in the universe, but I think the problem is, this specifically is what fills people with existential fear. Do we hit a wall in our civilization coming to collapse? I think what this specifically means is that we activate Jamie's impacts at the point at which people are more scared of war, more scared of climate change, and they think it will end all of civilization. I think this is when people are forced to contradict their current philosophical positions on whether or not humanity holds a sacred place, and I think this is exactly when people become less self-centered and anthropocentric about the fact that we own nature, we own the earth, and we own our universe. Why then does government win regardless of the results of the machine, something that I don't think our opposing bench has engaged with? If intelligent life does exist, accessing new and inspiring information about the universe we live in, I think noting that space is uniquely inspirational as a frontier of human progress here because of its sheer vastness, because it contains information about factors that contradict our embedded philosophies. Look at how discoveries of like Kepler and Copernicus were reacted to and shook the Catholic Church and fundamentally altered its composition. People dream of space, and material progress affects our ability to tap into this creatively. See the space age boom in speculative fiction, in people questioning their their governments and what the future would look like. See how science fiction calls upon us to consider dystopias of far-off possibilities of what we might do to our own Earth or how we may destroy our own environment. I think this is specifically relevant here because people react to new discoveries with enthusiasm, as Jamie has analysed you, because people react in this way regardless of the results anyways. We didn't have to discover aliens during the space age boom of the Cold War to make creative works about them, but we did need creative prompting from information that contains innate philosophical information about our galaxy. Yes, I think this is kind of an art debate, but also, why then will this information be non-threatening to most people? For all of the reasons that Jamie tells you, i.e. they're probably very far away, and they're also probably not like particularly intelligent. The anthropic principle tells us that it probably just looks like space monkeys or something. But I think we still access all of our benefits right. I think the discovery itself is magnified by the media that will be created about it. I think the discovery itself will prompt people to consider what else may lurk out there. I think people will be engaged when they discover that humans aren't the only intelligent life. Why then will reception of this information be quite good? I think it's fair to say we get some resistance to the information from some groups. I think this is innate to all kinds of progress. But note, firstly, I think non-agreement with this information is likely pretty neutral. I think people can choose not to engage if they don't want to, but I think they will for all the reasons Jamie told you. I think secondly, even people with hostile philosophical positions, with the idea that humanity occupies a higher place in the universe, while they may change their mind, as Jamie said and has analysed, they often will, and this will be good regardless, for example, for religious people. But also note that if you are really unwilling to alter your perspective due to your entrenched interest in humanity's higher position, I think that people can hold contradicting philosophical positions sometimes, in the case that their position is entrenched, like non-overlapping magisteria, as the kids call it. Because number one, they're already ardently religious people do things like STEM degrees and research stem cells and engage with science. And while science is capable of changing your system of belief, I think it specifically is because you consider analytical ways of thinking and you develop critical thinking skills and literacy. We are not required to prove everybody changes their mind about this in order to inculcate new philosophical perspectives and get Jamie's benefit of less selfish fucking perspectives of humanity, but also means that we give people the information to make hard decisions themselves about their lives that are critical, like about religion, about spirituality, specifically as it relates to our values and our morality. But I also like to respond to the POI that Jamie received from our closing, i.e. will humans be seen as having equal moral value to these creatures? I don't understand why this can't be an expansionary view of what is worth moral consideration, i.e. like how the animal rights movement have expanded our ideas of whether or not animals are worth moral value. I think we also just pose people additional questions about this, but I also don't think that this is exclusive in any way because we already dehumanize other human beings all of the time. This is just an additional mechanism by which we get people to question their entrenched perspectives. Why then is increased information good here? The most important thing in the debate, which is regardless of opening opposition's impacts, because this is about fundamental questions and things that hugely impact our rights and our ability to think. I cannot consent to being born into a universe where I don't know what happens after I die. I don't know why I'm here. I don't know if meaning is given or if it is something that I have to make for myself. I think this has a huge impact on people's individual lives, but also on society. I'll take closing.
Don't you think that even if there's a 1% chance that these aliens are a massive military power that are hostile, why on earth would you want to give people the news their descendants are going to be wiped out by some alien disease virus?
I think firstly this just ignores all of Jamie's framing about how this is incredibly unrealistic and stupid. But I also think that if we have to prepare for an alien war, I would like to know in advance. I would like to be warned about that. I want to like make some cool spaceships and like some guns and shit and do like Star Trek and everything. Okay, specifically then, people's individual lives are touched by the idea that they're the only people in the universe because this is a specific criteria by which many religions operate. It also just informs agnostic people whose moral values are based on the ideas that humans deserve inherent rights, but not necessarily encompassing the fact that we have obligations to nature and to other human beings, other sentient beings. But I think this hugely also impacts society, because at the point at which we feel an obligation or a ownership of our universe, specifically of our globe, I think this is when people are unable to question whether or not they actually need to look after the environment or safeguard nature or safeguard other animals. I think the fact that this gives people more information in the first place is prior to everything in this debate, because it gives them more ability to consent into both their ideological perspectives and their religious perspectives. It is not fair that I had to be born in this world, but the least thing people can do is give me more information to inform my perspectives and how I choose to act on that information, regardless of if I act in a good way or not. All being said, shout out to Jamie for being an excellent debate partner. You're the maverick to my ice man. You're my watermelon man. Shout out to SSDC for being an amazing circuit. Thank you very much. This was fun.
I would like to thank that speaker for that speech. Close off the top half. I'm happy to announce the deputy leader of the opposition.
We are all trapped in a system of consumption which necessitates the privation of resources at the expense of the weak. We are all trapped in an evolutionary process which necessitates the proliferation of pain over pleasure universally. We are all trapped in an intellect which seeks out reason and is denied it at every single turn. We would not wish this trap on others. We would not hope for a universe of pain. Opening government criticised the human proclivity towards anthropocentrism, and yet their case is anthropocentrism embodied, only caring in an infinite universe about the pain that exists on a small blue dot in the middle of nowhere, rather than the universal question of whether we should believe that a world that has other sentient beings in it is one that is preferable for those beings who have the capacity for pain and pleasure. So, the first question that I seek to address in this speech is the question of what we should hope for. I would propose two things here. The first thing is we should hope for a better world morally, i.e. it is the duty of the House to wish for that which is the most moral. Reason is the capacity we all share, and the instantiation of that reason in the world is an evaluative system of that world, which is to say a moral framework, a comparison of better worlds, which can indeed be retrospective, i.e. we would not hope to find out that a friend or a loved one had lost their parents many years ago, even if emotionally they had recovered. I would like to note that, like in general, if we ever debate about things like the environment, we don't just consider what would happen to humans, but to animals and to smaller life forms within those contexts. Why should we not have this in our context of this debate? We never get an answer from Proposition Bench. Without that weighing, they cannot be within the top half of this debate. Second thing I would propose is utilitarianism, because we need to ask what constructs that framework by which we should evaluate the world. We would propose that it should be that which creates the least total suffering is the best system. Consider this. Deontology, i.e. things like you should not ever lie, are fundamentally begging the question, because they are based off of an assertive framework about a thing that is external to us as humans that we cannot have the capacity to perceive, and yet it claims that we should base our intuitions off of those claims, even when they seem really unintuitive. That you should not lie is as true when someone asks you for your credit card details as it is when the axe murderer comes to your door asking where your mother is. Neither of those things should be the same, and therefore that is the wrong system. Utilitarianism, therefore, uniquely is valuable, because it is based by a phenomenal instinct that we have contained within ourselves, i.e. the intuition that we universally share, that pleasure is something that is morally good, that pain is something that is morally bad, that putting pain on someone for no reason is something that we should err against in all instances. But it's even better than that, because it's not culturally defined, it's not relativistic, it's arithmetic, i.e. we can use mathematics and basic systems of addition and subtraction to decide which is the better world in a comparison of two worlds, and therefore that is the best thing we should do. Notably, it cannot be just net utility for two reasons. Firstly, each individual within that system of utility has a unique access to a perspective, which means that you cannot just be considering whether an individual's premise is the best one. But secondly, and more importantly, because there's an intuitive framework here, right? It would lead you to what is called the absurd conclusion within philosophy, which is to say the idea that one person leading a really, really good life would be a better world than 7 billion people leading a quite good life. We would propose to you, therefore, that it is the net amount or the total amount of suffering that exists within the universe that is the most important framework by which we should evaluate this debate. We get no engagement on that from opening government, and therefore they cannot be winning absent a framework of why we should consider these things. To this closing government say, aha, but animals have no sentience. I just don't think that that's true. I just don't think the average informed voter believes that it's true. I just don't think that your opening government said that it was true, because they criticise anthropocentrism within humanity. They said that the world that we should be seeking out is the world which protects animals and the environment writ large. Because of that, they cannot stand by that framework in response to us, because animals have the capacity for pain and pleasure, because the human-like existence existences that might be in that universe also contain the capacity for intellect, for reason, for those kinds of processes. Absent a justification from that from closing government, they cannot be winning this debate. 3 things we told you in opening opposition about why existence is fundamentally something we should err against in all instances, that we should hope does not exist outside of this tiny blue dot, that we should hope we exist alone in the universe. The first thing we propose to you is that existence requires energy, and because evolution necessitates competition, it prioritizes not the individuals who are able to get energy passively, like photosynthesis from the sun, but the higher organisms who are able to consume those having already been collected, because it requires less expensive energy to collect energy where it already exists. This is the reason why fundamental to the question of existence is the answer of, firstly, conflict for resources where they are scarce, but secondly, the consumption of other organisms, the conflict against those organisms in order to fight against each other. That brings about the pain and suffering that we talked about in opening opposition. Closing, go ahead.
Why do you have the moral right to want other organisms to not exist?
We have the moral right to want other organisms not to exist because of the reasoning we give you as to why the evaluative framework of morality we should have is utilitarianism. Because it is not a right individuated within a person to have a particular perspective. It is the person's existence within a construct of moral frameworks that we have evaluated already that matters in this instance. Second claim we put towards you is evolution. It's very simple here. In order to compete and outcompete the other life forms that exist within a particular context, by definition you need to be always seeking out more and more. You can never rest on your laurels because the animals that don't will outcompete you. They will slaughter you. That will create the pain that exists within that world. Therefore, we will devolve back to what we call the hedonic treadmill, which is to say the idea that if I get an Xbox next week, sure, it will feel good for a couple of days, but I will want more, and I will want more, and it will always become more difficult to a point where you necessarily reach nihilism. But secondly, we explained to you in this context, it means that pain never resolves back to that medium. If I'm hungry this week, and I'm hungry next week is no better than it was for me this week. That is the fundamental reason why existence is on total always going to contain more suffering than it does pleasure. The last thing I want to talk about is consciousness itself. Before that, what is your extension, closing government?
I won't tell you.
Okay, opening government.
If no other intelligent life exists, it suggests humans don't have long life left in the tank because it means it will be destroyed by war, climate change, or disruptive technology.
So I think there's 2 important things to say on this, which is to say our side of the house is not premised on whether our side can be true. We can think that this machine will always give the answer yes and still hope that the answer is no for the reasons we've given. But secondly, and more importantly, we do not know at what point along the evolution that those other intelligent lives are. They may be stuck in their version of the medieval age at the moment. They may be stuck in their Anthropocene. They may be stuck in any different form of their existence, but any path along that existence, whether that's retrospective or prospective, contains the negative harms that we talked about and therefore is morally salient in the context of this debate. The last thing we talked to you about was consciousness, because consciousness by definition is reason and seeks to find out reason, even if it is only isolated in higher forms of consciousness. The absence of that reason brings about deep nihilism, because of course it does. You are trying to find out how the world exists. Your brain is telling you to do it, and if you cannot do it, you feel like you are failing. You feel like you are lost in these systems. We say that the systems that become created within a system of evolution, of geography, of politics, of sociology, all interconnected with one another, means that as an individual within that framework, you never have the capacity to understand that. The deepest questions, why are we here, where are we going, can never be answered by a human consciousness, or indeed any other form of consciousness that exists within the context of this debate. Existence is fundamentally a negative thing. We should do the best that we have with the lives that we have as they remain, but we should not wish it upon anyone else because it is trapping them into a system of fundamental pain I'm very proud to oppose.
Thank you very much for that speech, and thank you, top half, for a very nice debate so far. Now to kick us off in the bottom half, very happy to introduce the Member of Government.
Are you able to hear me? Okay? Okay. Okay, starting in 3, 2, 1. The path to victory of closing government is going to be very simple. We will prove to you that there is a unique experience, a unique hope, a unique right to sentient beings. And based upon this hope, we necessarily should want them to exist. We should be hopeful. There should be the case. I want to directly clash with opening opposition in this particular case. Why is, like, this is something very important. You do not choose to be born, yes, but we do not have access to know which of the human beings or sentient beings would want to be born and which of the human beings would not want to be born. We simply do not have information based upon this sort of thing. So what happens then? This is simply a coin flip. 50% would want to be born, 50% would not want to be born based upon this particular thing. We also have uncertainty whether they know about the existence of the real world, so they cannot also comprehend based upon this particular thing. Now, why is it that you have opt-out on their side of the house, but you don't have opt-out on our side of the house? On their side of the house, and I know that this is very bad, trigger warning, but you can opt out, you know what I'm talking about in this particular case. You have the means to opt out, you have the tools for these particular things, you can force it on yourself, you can do it. But secondly, there is a general trajectory of lowering euthanasia as society progresses, due to structural reasons. What are these structural reasons? Firstly, it usually starts with the fringe cases, you know, people that have cancer, leukemia, and it's very hard for society to argue based upon these things, because there is an emotion of sorrow, because you cannot put yourself in these particular things. Secondly, as people become richer, and people become richer because capitalism works, more stuff is being created, it's getting better, also democracies are created, there are better policies, etc. So there is a general trajectory of people being more empathetic when they don't have their personal stuff like being harmed in this particular case, so they're more likely to do this. Thirdly, religion gets less and less power due to technology to do this sort of thing. So maybe euthanasia is not legal right now, but there is a general trajectory of allowing this to happen more and more. What is the conclusion of this sort of thing? You can opt out if you are being born. You cannot opt out if you've never been born in this particular case. This is why we have a unique moral existence and a unique moral duty and feeling that all human beings have to wish for your fellow brother or sister to exist in this particular case. But you ask yourself the question, why is this the case? And let me answer it. 6 mechanisms here. Firstly, there is no utility without existence. There is no way for a sentient being to comprehend what has value. You know, this is the classic debate example. An apple has an apple because I wish that that apple has this sort of thing. But no, this is complicated many things. With rationality, with you being able to feel, to touch this sort of thing. On their side of the house, there is no utility because there is nothing. You cannot comprehend. You cannot understand this sort of thing. You cannot quantify this particular case. So in order to have utility, you must wish for other beings to exist, for them to experience, to feel, to have a good time. But notice, secondly, people, like sentient beings, have infinite potential. We create works of art. We create businesses and charities that help many people. We create innovation, technology, all of these sorts of things. And like you, as you said, like maybe there are, this is not all people, but many people can do amazing things. Like Elon Musk taking us to Mars. Like how you say, Nikki carrying me whole tournament and these type of things. But thirdly, there are deeply personal reasons here. And I want to be very descriptive here. People, sentient beings form relationships. They feel love. They have a special feeling towards someone. You know, all of the endorphins kicking in your system in this particular case. The special moments that you have, your first kiss, the first time you had sex, the first time you drank alcohol, all these things, sort of things. But we also have feeling of brightness within us, hope, and these particular things. People feel, how do you say, positive emotions, unique experiences to them, and these sort of things that makes them who you are. People identify with this sort of things. People remember these sort of things and these particular things. But fourthly, you can also rationalize this as it starts. So when you're born, you're more like an animal, right? Because, how do you say, you have primal instincts, etc. But as you go in life, you gain information, you gain experience, you get lived experience. When this process applies, you are better able to become sentient. So if you want to choose, you can opt out in these particular things because you can weigh benefits and costs and this particular thing. But fifthly, the Irish say suffering is pain. I will say to them, this is completely wrong. Why? Because people can, how do you say, can base different things, can base pain towards benefits in this particular case. The analogy is, you may have had a shit day at work, but you can go home, you can have a nice meal that warms you up. You can talk with your wife in these particular things. You can play with your kids and do all of these particular things. But the structural analysis here is you can rationalize the harms based on the benefits in these particular things. And here is a certain extent we have to bite the bullet. But pain exists so that benefit can exist as well. Like, so you can relativize and benchmark it in this sort of thing. So maybe certain times you're able to feel pain, but it's not a necessary precondition. I think most people are happy. I think most people can look at their lives and say, yes, I managed to have a nice job. I managed to raise some kids. I managed to do great things. I managed to have certain aspects of my life that were good in this sort of thing. But also psychologically, you have nostalgia, right? So when nostalgia kicks in, it's basically a mechanism that makes you feel like you were, how do you say, you had an interesting young life in this particular thing. You can always reflect and do this sort of thing. But the pain can also be healed, and this is the important thing. You can heal it through different compensatory mechanisms. You can have a beer. You can talk with someone. You can rationalize it in this particular case, in this sort of thing. Yeah, before I get 6th reason, yeah.
You are biologically hardwired to continue your existence to reproduce. If you You have never been, you are not a moral actor, and therefore not important. This pain doesn't exist.
Not. You can stop your biological urges. I may have a biological urge to tear my clothes and be naked in front of you, and I'm not doing. The Irish may be a bad example because they have biological urge to run crazy principle all the time. But trust me. You can think, right? You can think for yourself. You can gain information. You can stop these biological urges. If you really want to do it, you do it. But no, you know what's the second response to this? People do not have that much of a bad time to murder themselves, right? Like, people can simply go about their lives. Even if they have bad experience, they can do this sort of thing, etc. What we prove to you is, for the worst people, for the people who have it worse, they can still opt out. But for the people that have it good, they can have a good life in this particular case. So, good response, guys. We crushed it. Our response is more comparative. Sixth and final reason, and this I want to. They cannot prove to you that God doesn't exist. We have uncertainty whether or not God exists in this particular case. God gives us a certain roadmap of existence to uphold, what is the path to this sort of thing, to be good people, to value the image of this particular case. God wants us to exist in this particular case, to be in the image of God, etc., to have something necessarily special to our existence in this. So for us to wish that other creatures that are also God's children, that are also rightfully and willingly sentient beings, etc., it's a very problematic thing in this particular case. The final thing that I would like to note, they say there is total suffering. There are two things here. Firstly, this is extremely subjective, based upon their own logic. You have no access to a human being. Maybe me stabbing myself may harm me, to cause so much utility, but maybe to another person, this may not necessarily be the case. But secondly, there is a general trajectory of change. Sentient creature, look, this is the simple logic. If their harms are true, then people have incentive to collectivize to stop these harms from happening, right? To form things like democracy, to form things like collective unions, to want more rights, to, gain more stuff, create more technology, make this sort of thing better. But not. Even if they win on the utility calculus marginally, so we are more harmful. The only way for us to achieve, pure rights of these individuals is to opt in on the side of caution and want them to exist in these particular things, because they cannot exist on our side of the house, and I prove to you the human sentient being condition is important. Yeah, propose.
Thank you very much for that. And now to introduce the member of opposition.
Cool. Am I audible like this? Great. In CO, we're going to win this debate by mechanizing why this announcement on their side causes immense social harm on Earth, and then explaining why the announcement on our side causes societal benefit. Importantly, and as framing, our case will be in no way contingent on what this alien life looks like, how intelligent it is, or what degree of sapience it possesses, or how it evolved, or speculation about the total amount of utility that exists in the universe. Rather, we will explain immediate and certain impacts. They may not sound as fancy or as sexy as short diagonal, but they will be real. On opening government, OG claims that humanity needs to be humbled because right now they believe they are unique. Firstly, I'm not clear how many humans have this belief. Many humans believe they are morally insignificant because they have a small planet in the universe. Their education system says they are not significant in a religious or moral sense, and individually, as government concedes, religion is fading in prominence to a degree as the scientific method becomes more entrenched in society. But secondly, as we learn more about other animals, dolphins, chimps, and so on, we often are able to recognize that they're very close to us in terms of intelligence and be humbled in that manner. So if you are predisposed to believe in that kind of thing, you can believe it on either side. But thirdly, if this life is unlikely to be super intelligent, lots of humanity, i.e. politicians and decision makers, would make the same analytical deduction Jamie did in 15 minutes and would still feel superior because space deer are probably not the equivalent of humanity. But I'm going to flip this. I actually think of the status quo, most people feel incredibly insignificant and pour thousands of hours into futile jobs, relationships that fluctuate without meaning, and feel that they are insignificant and incredibly unimportant within the universe. What I think this announcement does on our side of the house is tells them that they are significant in a moral way that people do not have, in the same manner that religion has given comfort and solace to millions of people throughout history by telling them that they're unique and have a specific place of meaning in the universe. We do that to us on their side and give them an opt-out and a solace from the life without meaning that they'd otherwise engage with. Then they say you get rid of religion and harmful belief. I think this is a massive harm, right? Because millions of people rely on this for solace in the status quo. It is the place they turn to when they lose someone. It is their comfort in times of personal and social instability. It's their lodestar in times of calamity that they cannot control, and it alleviates massive amounts of anxiety. I think you get millions of people on their side at the point at which this announcement drops who have a crisis of faith. They feel really shaken. This is a really terrible harm insofar as they lose out on the ability to access and believe in the church congregations, people losing support structures they relied on their entire life. I think if utility is a metric in this debate, this is a massive utility negative, and I have no idea why they engage in the kind of positive stuff that Karis and Jamie want them to at the point at which their faith is shaken and at the point at which they feel like this information ruined their life. But I don't think you can get rid of religion, right? Because many people still eventually want to crave that kind of spirituality. So I don't know why a world where everyone are Buddhists or Shintoists is better than a world where there are more religions. So that's symmetric as well. But insofar as people do leave Christianity, they're not going to turn to Buddhism or some other good religion. They're probably going to turn to quack religions, like New Age religions, who've been saying all along that aliens exist, or quacks like Alex Jones, who have been saying that the government has been covering up the existence of aliens for years and years and years. What happens on their side is you push people to more disutile forms of belief, more likely to get scammed and to have their money taken away from them, or at the very least just be taken for a ride and come to believe really other terrible beliefs, because these often overlap and correlate with beliefs like anti-vaxxers and things like this. Croatian tourism, symmetric, because on either side they can market themselves as the place where alien life was proven to exist or not exist. But finally, OG cannot claim that people tune this out, ignore it, but at the same time it will have a massive benefit in changing people's psychological states. They have to pick one. It probably does change people's psychological states for all the reasons Karis herself analyzed. I'll flip that in a moment. On CG, and this addresses the short diagonal. Note that intelligent life does not mean there is non-intelligent life in the universe. If O is right and animals also have value, they probably have equal moral worth, and this clash becomes very marginal. But secondly, utility in the universe is ultimately a wash because it is incredibly inherently speculative. This is because it is unclear whether more people, or aliens, will be able to access existence on either side. I could claim that those civilizations will likely eventually wipe each other out because they'll come to compete over resources. Many beings compete over resources. When you have multiple competing civilizations in the universe, you could end up wasting resources on duplicate costs and things like this, and say on the comparative, humanity is more likely to survive and reproduce and things like this. I'm not going to run that as an extension because I'm not crazy, but note that I can come up with this speculative logic chain on our side as well and prove that humankind will reproduce to a massively greater extent on our side, and therefore more life will come into the universe on our side eventually when they have the universe themselves and won't get wiped out by some other civilization that gets wiped out by another civilization that then they kill each other or something like that. So that could happen. That could be bad. We don't know. Why is the announcement likely to cause public panic and make millions of people's lives way worse? This is the most important impact in the debate because it is incredibly certain, especially if the aliens are not likely to come and engage with you anytime soon, as Karis concedes is unlikely. Firstly, immediately after the announcement happens, this is likely to crowd out discourse around a whole range of issues that are more proximate to people's lives, i.e. the next election, tax policy, healthcare. Discussions of this become crowded out by the massive amount of coverage that is necessarily amplified by the media when this announcement drops worldwide. Karis concedes this when she says it's amplified by the media, which means it will be omnipresent and cover everywhere. This means that, firstly, there will necessarily, because the media's incentive is always to sensationalize things to generate revenue via clicks and things like this, to engage in sensationalizing news in a race to the bottom, i.e. they're going to imply that these aliens are not just space deer, they're going to say there are massive military power coming to invade, or that they're sapient, very intelligent and dangerous, or that contact is imminent. And even if it's not covered in the mainstream news, if it's regulated somehow, this has a huge ability for conspiracy theorists and unreliable news sites to market this as incredibly important. This destroys the OG impact in this debate, because OG are relying on people internalizing a very specific message, one that is positive and humbles humanity. Instead, it will be sensationalized. No idea why this humbles you. It probably fills with fear, dread, and existential anxiety. But secondly, people already believe that the government is covering up the existence of aliens. They have a massive amount of platforms for anti-government people, conspiracy theorists, and things like this. When you prove definitively that this is true, what this does is amplifies anti-government skepticism massively. But thirdly, many, many people are religious. I've already proven that shakes their faith to an extent. They'll feel miserable and feel like they were lied to by their congregation. That's an incredible amount of disutility on their side. The impacts of this are threefold. Firstly, it means that people are more likely to feel fear, panic buying, and so on and so forth. Massive amounts of anxiety. But secondly, it means that people are far more skeptical of their government. This of course applies to things like vaccines, public policy, healthcare, and so on and so forth. But finally, it means that many people are just psychologically ruined forever. Before I weigh this argument as the most important thing in this debate, I'll take opening.
If non-intelligent life exists, given that evolution tends towards more intelligence over time and Earth is very young relatively, this is disastrous for humans since it suggests there's a cap on the degree of intelligence life can possess before being entirely eradicated.
I just don't think this genuinely matters compared to everything I've said thus far in the debate. I'm moving on. Why do we think this weighs over the other teams in the round? Firstly, their case on OO is incredibly speculative. It relies on you believing evolution on other planets happened precisely the same way it did on Earth, via a food chain and things like this. It's possible. It's also possible it did not, and these aliens all have great degrees of green energy. But secondly, it's unclear whether, and I'm still unsure after short diagonal, we can ascertain the preference of these life forms in internal mental states, whether from beyond the veil of ignorance they prefer to live lives even if those lives are bad. But finally, it's a wash, right? Because even if the scale of net disutility in the world is larger on their side, the scale of net utility is also larger, because tons of species derive immense pleasure from being able to have sex, pleasure from being able to eat, and things like this. They say life is inherently disutile. They don't prove it because it depends entirely on perception. Our argument weighs over theirs on certainty, but also, insofar as people suffer on our side, and we prove they suffer deterministically, these people are definitely moral actors. But finally, our argument is not contingent to any extent on what this life looks like. It flips OG, because top half our ships passing in the night, they don't engage with that. Final extension. How does this change people's quality of life? Firstly, I think it gives people a sense of purpose. Why? In the status quo, tons of people lead meaningless lives that are absolutely desperate. They live on the hedonic treadmill. They feel sadness because their happiness is dependent on things outside their control, like the length of their relationship. Thirdly, their preferences change and are often hard to fulfill. We give people that sense of fulfillment and purpose that is incredibly critical. But secondly, in the status quo, NASA and space agencies put tons of money into exploring deep space internally. They're now likely to shift their funding within space travel elsewhere, explore more nearby planets to extract resources that benefit people on the ground to a significantly larger extent. Insofar as we prove deterministically that we give people a sense of purpose in life that they otherwise can never access, and because we prove deterministically that real harm happens to humans under certainty, which outweighs everyone else in the debate, for all of these reasons, and for Berlin, for Bard, and for LSE, I am so fucking proud to oppose one last time.
Thank you very much for that speech. Now to conclude the government bench, I'm very happy to introduce the government whip.
This time they are not allowing me to touch the microphone. Once again a rebel, always a rebel, but I won't do it, it's fine. I have a funny intro. But it's also plagiarism, so you'll know. If you know, you know. Do you know how many EPL teams you need to beat Sofia? At least 4. Two more important things in this debate. There is no guarantee of scope of information. InfoSlides guarantees you only a simple yes or no answer to the question. Everything else is highly speculative. It also means that everything else is highly speculative to the extent in which we are really not sure how people are going to react. And I just want you to be very clear on burdens. The amount of logical leaps that you need to take in order to prove any argument that actually says people get this information and now they do this and that and this and how the world changes is a huge burden that all of the teams, especially opening government and closing opposition, are taking in this debate. We are far more superior in terms of what is actually morally needed to be done without relying on huge amounts of logical leaps that we need to undertake in order to prove the ability of our arguments. What does Rumen bring you and why it's very important? I will do some EPL translation for all of you so you understand that is actually very fucking smart. Internalized biases. Internalized biases essentially mean two things. Let me EPL translate. You have epistemic access towards yourself. Why is this important? It's important because you have ability to learn from yourself, you have ability to internalize how you feel in certain situations, what is a biological urge and what is a rational thing to do in these cases. But it also means that you can think of you have the ability to think and have the incentive to think of your life as more good than bad. Because people prefer pleasure than pain. And while pleasure and pain are interchangeable, is meaning that you cannot experience pleasure without experiencing pain and vice versa. This also means that you then have a particular preference. So when you're internalizing and you're calculating whether your life is generally good or bad, the likelihood is that you feel your life is actually more good than bad. Let's engage with opening opposition. First of all, on biological urges. I have easy fix on the biological urge to reproduce. They were hanging out on day 2, I think. I think I have 3 of those in my back pocket, so that's pretty good. Now, I think that this is important because all of the reasons they say, oh, there's limited amount of resources and things like that people are going to fight. I think that this does not engage with Roman analysis like there is a trajectory for things to get better over time, and it's highly speculative to what extent. Even if it's not that better, why it's going to necessarily get worse. I think all of the incentives are on our side of the house, and all the intuition and how the world actually works is on our side of the house in these cases. But I also want to be very clear about this. You might be poor, but still choose to fight. You might be in a very bad situation, you might have accessibility issues, but still choose to fight. Who the fuck are the Irish to tell this person that he does not have the access to fight? He does not have the ability to turn his life around? I don't know. Maybe they are God. I don't think so, so we cannot know. And this is very important. Life is the precondition for exercising and developing agency. Only when you're alive, you're able to develop that agency over time and decide for yourself. So the key comparative in this debate will always be the ability to not opt out on their side of the house and the ability to opt out on our side of the house. To the extent in which even one fucking person wants to live on our side of the house and everybody else can fucking kill themselves, that's absolutely fine, to the extent in which they had the ability to get to that situation. And I want to visualize this. Obviously, when you're a little kid, you're a little baby, you do not know what the fuck you want. You do not know how to experience life. So you learn through things, through human language, through experiences. You understand when you touch the stove, it hurts, so you don't do it anymore. But when you have sex, it's good, so you do it a couple of more times. And that is very important. In these situations, the only way that you access these particular preferences and understand what are those preferences and whether they're worth living is on our side of the house. This is extremely, extremely important. Later. Okay, so CEO. They basically say people feel insignificant, they have structural reasons to feel insignificant, no actual engagement with why there is a trajectory to improvement, but I also want to do this very clear comparative. We have no calculus currently to decide whether humans are more important than this other civilization. I do not believe, I really cannot tell you whether, like, even if you're suffering a little bit more on their side of the house, and again, like, they have to prove huge logical leaps that there's going to be dramatically more suffering on our side of the house when we know these aliens exist, because I don't think, like, people care as much about aliens existing in the first place. I think that, like, people are very selfish. They understand that there is war happening, that they can be nuked at any moment, but they still don't feel particular anxiety and things like that. They're still living their life and are far more interested in whether they're going to fuck tonight than whether, like, Russia is going to invade other country in the next few places. So to the extent in which it is unsure how dramatic that impact is, we cannot really weigh whether, like, it is worth it for humans to suffer a little bit more so that other species, other sentient species that we also agree that have agency and we want that agency to actually exist. This is very important. The Irish go.
Nostalgic, peaceful creatures with those in government were crushed by evolution. Both animals on Earth are factory farmed chickens, and the humans above them can never escape the skepticism which destroys meaning. If it's true here, it's probably true in Alpha Centauri.
Evolution. The animals are the precondition for a sentient life to exist. Monkey, then person. This is why, even if we're talking about animals, at some point they're going to develop some type of sentiency. It is unclear when sentiency stops. They never tell you about this. All the arguments about achieving agency and how that is more important over time still exist, even for animals. But also, God. And this is very important. They cannot prove to you, and if Ahmed does it, fuck yeah, boy, win euros with that. They cannot prove you that God doesn't exist. So as far as we fucking know, God might fucking exist. Maybe there is 1% chance. This is still enough, and we are essentially removing the ability of these people to access, for example, heaven, because heaven might be, life might be the precondition for heaven. So as far as fucking know, that's very important. And look, people, they are, like, this is a very all over debate. EPL teams say very big teams. At the end of the day, it's kind of simple. People can do whatever the fuck they want. They only do it on our side of the house. I think it's pretty simple. I think this is actually a very easy ESL biased debate at the end of this round. I'm so fucking happy. There aren't any more finals, I guess, so you won't see us again.
Thank you very much for that speech. And now to conclude this debate as a whole, I'm happy to invite the opposition whip.
Am I audible? Great. Just making sure I have my notes sorted.
It's like 3 rounds now. Come on, get your own water bottle.
Before I start my speech, I'm not going to do a bunch of thank yous because I'm already going to do that on the Facebook post. But I would like to say that it is a privilege to be on this stage. It's something many people don't really get the privilege of having or doing. A judge once told me there's this really special feeling you get in your gut when you're on stage in front of a lot of people. Whether that's good or bad, I don't know, but it's a privilege to have because not many people will have it. Great. With that being said, let's win a Euros final. 3, 2, 1. I think it's fucking hilarious that Nikki said our case is a logical leap when their whole case depends on the environment and context of a fucking planet and alien species we have never met before as opposed to humans on this planet. Let me be very clear on the framing for short diagonal. It is entirely speculative. You have no idea whether they have more pain receptors than dopamine receptors. You don't know what political and economic system they have, and you don't know what environmental conditions they have and if they have renewable energy. You should adjudicate this debate on information we actually have. Yes, to some degree our impacts are speculative, just like everyone, but it is a smaller degree because we have prior information on human behavior. Why are ours less speculative? It only relies on you believing that the media covers this exactly as they did, for example, Trump getting elected or any form of war. Matt's impacts are more certain because they are based on patterns we already observe on this planet and the incentive that media has to sensationalize. Secondarily, humans have more of an obligation because they are most proximate to you and you have an obligation to those closest to you insofar as you know their preferences best. Let's take out the OO, which will also take out the CG. OO says we are shackled by existence. The only thing shackled was me having to listen to that boring ass fucking speech. Let me be very clear. Their case is entirely speculative. All of their analysis operates from the perspective of an earthling, a perspective limited by the physical laws of our planet, pain and pleasure receptors of our brains, moral calculi, and human perceptions of reality. In other words, and this is critical, their premise is isolated to a context that is structurally unclear to be transferable to another context and planet. Why does this wash out their whole case? One, you do not know whether or not they can feel pain, by definition. You literally don't know if they have more pain receptors or not. Secondarily, you have no information on the path of evolution they take. Why is it animals eating other animals? Why must there necessarily be a competition? The premise of evolution they use is one dependent on Earths that I don't know why exists on another planet. Thirdly, you don't know the conditions of their environment. They could literally have different physical laws from us insofar as they can have an entirely renewable energy source that is eternal, which doesn't require taking energy from other species, which would disprove the inherent need to take energy from another. On the hedonic treadmill, these arguments again rely on a human perspective and the way our human brains work that we do not know operates on another planet. Finally, they presume existence cannot also be a blessing, which is again the CG case against them. The upshot, their principles rely on information you cannot know. You by definition do not know, the same as CG's. Why does this also take out CG? Their case, in contradiction directly to OO, is existence has a lot of utility and potential for it. Capitalism, democracy, innovation, a feeling of love, etc. All of this is again speculative, reliant on a perspective of Earth creatures that is not transferable to other life forms. Their existence could literally also be entirely pain receptors like O said. What if there's a really evil like Star Wars empire enslaving the whole population? We don't know this. All we know is that they are intelligent and that is it. Secondarily, we do not know the differential amount of pain or dopamine receptors. But thirdly, and this is critical, I don't know why they have the same positive trajectory that humans and human civilizations do. Both the CG and the OO rely entirely on information that is inaccessible based on the motion slide. The upshot of this, our impacts or our case is again speculative as all impacts in debate. But theirs by definition is more speculative because it's based on a planet and creatures we have no information about except that they are intelligent. We don't know the kind of intelligence that leads to emotional utility or suffering or pain. Why do we take out OG now? Their entire case is, there's an age of enlightenment and better systems of belief. I'm going to explain to you why it is unclear to actually materialize and why it's not mutually exclusive. First thing, and this is critical, if it's unlikely they are super intelligent, as Jamie says, I don't know why it's likely we humble humanity's opinions of them. They say most people might speculate because they won't know if they're space monkeys or not. But if Edinburgh can figure out they're probably space monkeys, I think everybody else will also probably figure out they're space monkeys. Secondarily, if the life form is something you can otherwise never access, there's minimal care about them. That is to say, if they're so far away, I don't know why we have an emotional connection to them. That is to say, empathy towards others is limited by your proximity to them. The intuition pump here is think about the way you react when there's a natural disaster in a faraway country versus your own country, versus your own city, versus your own home and family. There's diminishing marginal returns on empathy based on the distance from which they are to you. Thirdly, why would people care about other life forms that you admit you cannot travel to if they are ignoring the lives of those who live next door? I have literally seen everyone at this tournament walk past a homeless person on the way to the social, including myself. I think we are fools to believe that we are good people that will care about a life form that we have never experienced or ever seen or engaged with or can even communicate to. Fourthly, it's incredibly unclear why the philosophical developments that they talk about require a new life form to exist and cannot happen organically. What alternatives make it clear that this announcement isn't a tipping point to discover new ways to discuss our philosophical developments? One, we have people like TCD Phil to get us the philosophy that we need. Secondarily, historically, humans love to talk about the moral ideas that they claim about. Throughout history, you have people like Kant, Mills, Edward Said. As history progresses and there are new events that happen, humans organically already try to discover what the correct moral answer is because it's innate to us. If they say it is innate within us, I don't know why we require another species to actually exist to trigger this innate curiosity that they talk about. Finally, they say the far unknown is unique. You see the discoveries of Kepler, etc. This would trigger a wonder and excitement that leads to educational pursuits. Note that the wonder of the unknown doesn't require a life to live there. People can still be inspired by the cool planets humans can travel to, the minerals we can find, etc. Before explaining why we very clearly outweigh against OG, I will take a POI from them, actually.
Most people don't want to be eternally depressed and are thus likely to be more open to ideas that allow them to rationalize their own existence positively, which is why people were open to progress in the space race despite the fact we're in the middle of the Cold War.
I think people are more likely to internalize their existence and think about their own existence more when they believe they are the smartest species to ever exist and the only ones to be capable of intelligence on this planet. This is very critical analysis that Matt tells you. If you want people to give a shit about their existence, the planet they live on, etc., that comes from scarcity, the belief that you are the only one that actually exists. This is the only planet we have that the universe has for a chance at intelligent life. We are the smartest species to ever actually exist. Before outweighing with the rest of the material, I want to be very clear. The impacts Matt gives you, even if they are not sexily explained because he's an ESL speaker, they are very clear and likely to materialize. Public panic causes things like stock prices to go down, and people literally cannot buy food or get fired. Skepticism of the government, which leads to less buy-in for really important policies like vaccination. Thirdly, the regular person now knows I am the smartest species that ever fucking existed in the universe. Fourthly, massive anxiety, which is an impact in of itself. Even if I know that I cannot travel to them, they might be able to travel to me, and the incentives are likely to promote anxiety for all of the media sensationalization mechanisms Matt gave you. That is to say, you weigh this debate on the information that you have. Speculative arguments exist on degrees. We are clearly the less speculative. Give us the win.
Thank you very much for that speech. Can we have a huge round of applause for an excellent finalist? Good luck. We'll see you on the